This is Dr. Josh Kunith, and I welcome you to the GAF podcast, where I discuss grading, assessment, and feedback in secondary schools. This is episode number 4, and I'll be discussing the evolution of high school English curriculum and instruction in 2020. But before I get into it, let me briefly introduce myself for those who don't know me. Again, my name is Josh Kunith, and I'm a veteran English teacher and department chair at Highland High School in Bakersfield, California, where I've been teaching now for 12 years. I currently teach 11th grade English and AP English Language and Composition. I also write and practice grading, assessment, and feedback reform. And I'm the editor of the Journal of School Administration, Research and Development, JSARD, which is an open access academic journal which publishes on educational leadership. And today's guest is Mindy Montanio, who happens to be in my same district, and she was once at my same school site. Mindy has served 21 years in education. She served as an English teacher, as a department chair. In fact, at one time, we were co-department chairs. And she currently serves as a teacher on special assignment for English language, arts, and literacy for the district. And she also, in addition to that, serves as a leader in our local teacher union. So thanks for joining us, Mindy. I appreciate your time. Can you take a minute and just explain a little bit about what you do in your current role?
Sure. I was hired down at the district office to serve as the teacher on special assignment for English language arts in 2018, I believe, 2017-18 school year. And that has grown. So really kind of being a liaison between our district and our department chairs, overseeing programming, things that we want teachers to explore and engage with in their classrooms. And that job has now expanded into literacy as well. So some things that I did this past year that I'm pretty excited about and proud of and hope we can continue, even depending on what school looks like, is our professional learning network, where we have teachers kind of self-select into groups to do a lesson study, where they plan and design a lesson together. They teach it in one of their classrooms, and they go back and they revise it. And so really working on both the curriculum and instruction piece. I'd like to build that group for next year. And then with literacy, we oversee our access and pre-access programs, which are our reading intervention courses for students reading below 6th grade level. And that's been really engaging. I've been a part of that for 6 years now, both as a teacher and as a leader of that group. So that's been a lot of fun, and really just kind of expanding our work with our consultant, our literacy consultant, Dr. Jill Hamilton-Bunch from Point Loma Nazarene University. We've been working closely together on that and how we can improve literacy across curriculum in our district.
Great, thanks. So I think you really bring an interesting perspective from the teacher perspective, somewhat from the admin perspective, and then there's the union perspective too, which I thought is especially interesting and apt for this topic. So again, our topic for today is the evolution of high school English curriculum and instruction in 2020. And I thought I'd just give a brief timeline of of this year for some context. So January through mid-March-ish, we had normal school going on, of course, whatever normal means, but something like that. And then mid-March until mostly the end of the school year, we have school closures, of course, for the most part around the country and distance learning going on. Of course, going into the summer, likely school closures, even though we have some states that are starting to open up. So that's going to probably depend more across the country, depending on region and state. Distance learning most likely going on as well. And then big unknowns, of course, for the fall, perhaps a hybrid format, perhaps a thing. And so again, some context for these few questions that we'll be talking about.
Sure.
So the first question I have, so what do you see right now? I thought it's important to start with students in this discussion.
Sure, I think it was an interesting question. I was going back last night and thinking about it. One of the jobs I forgot to mention is running our summer teams. And so I've been meeting with our different teams, just kind of trying to lay the groundwork for our summer work. And one of the team members talked about emotional support, and that she had been reading an article that probably now students are facing more trauma than they've ever faced before. And just thinking about the work that we're going to be embarking on and what we need to do next year, I think probably the biggest student needs right now would be that emotional support, that social emotional learning, and teacher flexibility. I think from my perspective, I do get to talk to a lot of teachers across our district, out of our district. I have connections with people all over the state. And it seems like students just need teachers to understand that they are learning, they are doing work, even though it's not business as usual, like you said, that normal, I think instructionally at this point, I'm not really sure. I don't know if you're going to talk about it, but the grading policy that went out from our district office kind of seemed to stall some of the work that was being done by students and teachers. So I don't think anybody was really prepared to flip the switch overnight when we went to distance learning. And so instructionally, I think our students, they're missing out, of course. But there's so many needs that they have right now. But I would say the biggest needs right now are probably flexibility and social emotional support.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And to what extent do you feel like this focus on SEL, right now needs to continue once we get out of this pure distance learning and into a new, whatever, back to normal or this new normalcy?
Well, so the group that I'm referring to that we had this conversation in was our One Book, One Bakersfield, or our One Book Project group. And so we were talking about the book that we'll be reading, and I'll mention that later on. Just how do we build lessons that can build community for students in a distance setting? And then what do we do? How do we then reinforce and continue to build that community when we get back into the classrooms in a more traditional setting? So I see teachers having to be very creative with that. So I think that social emotional piece is going to be huge when we get back to school.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's just a lot of things that we are learning right now as teachers, as educators, that it's just good teaching that we need to kind of our responsibility to bring it over once school goes back to face-to-face learning, and not to just leave it in the moment of distance learning.
Right.
Carry it over. So then a little bit about teachers then. So what do you think are some of the biggest teacher needs right now during distance learning?
I would say flexibility and emotional support. Just kidding. But true. I think a little bit. Again, just talking to teachers, I think, as hard as the school closures and distance learning have been on them, I believe teachers have kind of been given the gift of time right now. There's a lot of collaboration going on across our departments and within our learning teams. But I think right now, I would say teachers probably need some clarity about moving forward, what we're going to be doing with distance learning. I believe that now we know we're going to be using Canvas as a learning management system in the fall. I think now they need training, and they need really high quality training. Nothing that's, the big complaints I hear are that they don't understand why they're being trained or what they're being trained for. So I think that clarity piece is really essential for our teachers right now. And just to understand that it's not, even when we go back in the fall, and I'm glad you brought that up at the beginning, that it's not going to be normal teaching. And I think we have to be really explicit and clear that this is probably going to be a blended learning environment, and what that looks like. And lesson planning, it's going to look different. Your instruction is going to look different. So I think the best thing our district could do right now for teachers is come out in front of that and show them what it looks like. Even before we went on closure, we were being bombarded with universal design for learning, the UDL practices, and the least restrictive environment with special education. So now, kind of balling all of that up, what is that going to look like in the fall? And I think that teachers really need to be clear and have a really, really good sense of how to plan a good distance learning lesson and teach that effectively.
Yeah, a minute ago you mentioned about Canvas and the learning management system. For those who aren't familiar, again, it is a systematic learning management system. But do you recommend something like that for other districts as well, to have that in place as far as teacher resources and teaching and learning? How
Yeah,
essential?
I believe so. I'm still scratching the surface of Canvas myself. I'm attending a lot of trainings on it and trying to understand the difference between that and Google Classroom, which most of our teachers were already familiar with. I think initially we were like, why are we shifting from something teachers and students are familiar with to something like Canvas? And the more I hear about it, I think it's really going to help teachers deliver better instruction. I think that where Google is kind of more of a repository where you place your assignments, students will be able to interact better with Canvas as that learning management tool. Like the lessons will flow better. I think for students, the way we can embed content, videos, screencastify, I think there's a lot. It's I hear the word seamless a lot, but I think that that's what I'm going to land with Canvas. I think once teachers get used to using it, I think they're going to think it's a much better delivery system than what we're doing.
Yeah, I worry right now that to be effective and whatever effective is in
Mm-hmm.
teaching right now, but you have to be really tech savvy if you're predominantly using Google Classroom to incorporate all the other elements of creating your own videos and other apps and so
Mm-hmm.
on and so forth, and bring them all together yourself. And so one of the benefits I see of Canvas, which again I don't know that much about, I've used it myself in online
Mm-hmm.
classes college, but it just brings all that stuff together. It has those templates. They're just kind
Mm-hmm.
of ready to go for teachers. It allows some more streamlining to happen. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I worry about. Maybe more assigning going on right now than actual teaching, and maybe Canvas can help to change that with just that platform.
Yeah, I was thinking about that last night, and I know, and I know packet learning is not ideal, but I think in this scenario where we were thrown into it almost overnight, when we're feeling overwhelmed and there's not that sense of safety, I think we retreat back to just kind of those easy practices, like here's a novel, here's a study guide packet. And we know that that's not good instruction. It is just assigning. Here's an essay, write an essay. I'm dealing with that with my own children. Write a 5-paragraph essay about this. They've never been taught. So I'm hoping that instruction piece is a little bit better in Canvas for teachers so that they can record themselves teaching, and students will have their voice as they're trying to work through this. So I do see that as being a little bit better.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us to the next question. So we know it's not working, just assigning stuff, packets,
Yeah.
that are just for the sake of busy work is not effective. But what do you see as working, and anything else that you see is not working?
Yeah, I made my list last night, and I'm checking it twice. I would say, overall, the biggest thing that we hear, excuse me, is just the lack of equity. And I think that's across the nation. That's not just a Kern High School District thing. The access to technology, we've put a lot of Chromebooks in students' hands. Even our teachers are missing devices. And we weren't set up for this. The infrastructure, I think, for distance learning wasn't there to begin with, except for our distance learning teachers in Kern Learn. We don't have systems in place to support our neediest students, which I think kind of harkens back to that equity piece. And then I think a lot of teachers, because they don't know how to do distance learning, and that's no fault of their own, are teaching like they're still in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things I've heard from some people is, how do you get kids from cheating? How do you stop them from cheating in distance learning? I'm like, I don't know that you stop them from teaching, but maybe we design better lessons that students can't cheat.
Right.
So I think that that's a huge problem with what's not working. I don't know if you want to jump in, and then
Yeah, well, I have
that
makes me think right now as far as equity goes. So some teachers naturally are more tech savvy than others,
Mhm.
right? And so as far as teaching and learning goes, the students who just happen by the luck of the draw to have teachers who are more tech savvy are more likely to get a better education right now. And
Mhm.
that's part of, I think, the equity right now. Unfortunately, I think just like few teachers ever have any classes in college that prepare them for grading, few teachers ever have any classes in college. They may have one, but that really prepare them, but nothing would prepare them uh, for right now, these distance.
Mhm.
So teachers are not prepared. Again, it's not any fault of their own, but again, that's another aspect, I think, of that equity issue.
Well, and I think too, just yeah, teachers, they think they're using technology effectively, and all they're doing is just taking the worksheet they would have used and put it in Google Classroom. And I that's just basic substitution. I don't know that a lot of us are really well equipped to be innovative with technology. I see my own son who's in 5th grade. We were working on an article yesterday together, and he was so savvy with splitting screens and doing all of this other stuff. And I was just like, wow, that's great. But I think that we also assume our kids, our students now are really savvy with technology. And I don't think they are. I think they're savvy with their phones,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily. I think it's going to take a lot, even with Canvas,
Yeah.
to get kids to understand how to use that program as well.
Yeah.
But what I do think is working, and what I've heard from a lot of teachers, and maybe you can recall this from our department meeting, a lot of teachers have said it's been really great to have individual time with students. So when they're having their office hours, they're really able to check in with kids better than they can when they have a classroom full of 45 people. So I think that has been good. You yourself have spoken about being able to focus more on feedback rather than worrying about the grades. And I think it's a really great opportunity for our teachers to shift their own mindsets about what learning looks like, because it is different, and it will be different probably forever. I think the way that we're doing things, I don't see us necessarily going back to traditional learning. I think that it is aptly titled, we're evolving right now in curriculum and instruction. Experiencing these new online platforms, I think teachers are I think they're experimenting with these different virtual tools, and that's really great. Teachers who might not have before are able to do that. So I think there are a lot of positives in this, and we need to focus on those too.
Sorry, my audio just cut out there for a second, but I think that's a good point that you made about the potential for connection with students. And I happened to be in a Twitter chat last night for it was SBL chat, the standards-based learning chat. It happens every other Wednesday at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, which I think
is that a plug?
Well, I have no direct involvement. I just a participant in it. But so Ken O'Connor, who's well known in standards-based learning and grading and assessment, especially, he was the guest moderator, and he asked a question about to what extent did everybody think that one-on-one video conferencing was a good idea with students right now? And I think there was some good discussion on that. And I think basically, well, some things that I put forth, and some others did too, is, well, conferencing in the classroom is a great way to give really detailed feedback, even more so, of course, than written feedback. And so it seems like right now that's the best substitute to that one-on-one face-to-face conferencing, in person is video conferencing. So, I mean, that's one thing. But the second thing is to do that when you have lots of kids, when you have 150 students or so, that as far as logistics of that, that's even if all of our kids had technology and they knew how to get on and they had time, but it's really how to do that. So I think that can be really beneficial for a few kids, for a small group of kids. But how to do that on a large scale, it's probably impossible. I mean, I think maybe in the very best of circumstances, if you had very small class sizes and maybe your kids were very privileged, but besides that, again, I think more equity implications.
I think that's a good point. I was talking to a Kern Learn teacher, those are our blended learning teachers. and he teaches Spanish, and he tries to make contact with, I want to say he has 130 students, tries to make daily contact with all 130 students using a variety of platforms, through Flipgrid, because it's, how do you learn a foreign language online, without like Duolingo or something. But, as a teacher, he's trying really hard to hear his kids speak every day with him. And it is a massive amount of time that he spends doing that. And I wonder too, are there more efficient ways that we can do that in the future? What does that look like?
Yeah, right. So we're coming to the end of the school year, and it seems like it's been a long semester. It's been a long, I don't know, now we're in May already. Reminds me of Counting Crows song, A Long November.
Yeah.
But or Green Day song, Wake Me Up When September Ends, or, whatever. Anyway, what do you feel like teachers can do right now to plan over the summer, to plan for an unknown next school year? How can we best spend our summer planning and learning teams, or to prepare for what's really unknown?
Well, again, I think, that gift of time over the summer, I just, everyone I talk to, it's like, it takes 3 times longer to do anything on distance learning. I feel that way too. I know that a lot of us are just kind of going through this, technology fatigue, just because we're not used to it. It's like building muscle, right? So I think over the summer, I know some of the work that I would like to focus on with our teams is developing a little bit more alignment across our district between the schools. I think about Dr. Jill Hamilton Bunch's teeter-totter, we're trying to learn, 2 heavy things, 2 heavy content, learning Canvas. So I know teachers, I think, and I'll use Jill again, she says planning is key. I think the more well-prepared we are going into fall, ensuring that we have a plan. I think you and I have talked about this before. Maybe I talked about somebody else, but I think we go into curriculum mapping every year. And we spend so much time tweaking our curriculum maps that we never finish the entire year. So it's like we get first semester planned out.
Right.
And then we look at second semester and we're like, learning is a progression. And I think unless we think of the end in mind, by the end of the school year, where do I want my students to be? I think teachers spending their time thinking about that, not just the end of first semester, but let's take it full year. What do we want our students to be able to do by the end of the year? And then what do we want them to be able to do in the fall of the following school year? So I think that scope and sequence, where we're talking about that rigor and where do we bump up the rigor between grade levels, I think if teachers spend some time collaborating and talking about that, maybe less of a focus on developing a lot of materials and resources, but focusing on what is essential. And then the best method of delivery using Canvas, knowing that that's what we're going to be using in our district. What can we already take that we have created? And then how can we make that instruction fit Canvas and fit that distance learning model? And I think that would prepare people for the unknowns of next year. Just kind of knowing that.
Yeah, I think those are some good points. But what do you think about, again, going back to that brief timeline there, mid-March, kids are no longer in school, they're at home, right? And so we're not talking about much continuation of learning. So for a lot of kids, that they're going to have big gaps. I think we should just assume that we have, 2.5 months or so. How do you plan to address that for next school year? I know it's a hard question, but.
Well, it is, but it isn't. I think knowing that everybody is kind of facing the same gap. And I think it goes back to that privilege comment. I don't know if we use the word privilege or not, but those kids who are better equipped, Jill Hamilton Bunch talks about the Matthew effect, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
Right.
I think going into the beginning of the year, I think if we were better dialed in with diagnostics, like how do we use diagnostic testing so that we can gauge where kids are when they get to us, and then how we can support the different learners in our classrooms. I know that's like a really lofty goal. I think like grouping kids, being better at that. And I'm hoping, we develop a way to do that through Canvas. If we can group kids into their individual learning needs. I could see that as time being really well spent too, but we don't know what that's going to look like. So I think we have to anticipate those skills gaps, like you said. I think about my own son who's an 8th grader, and he'll be at Highland next year, what he missed out on, and just how fortunate he is to have an English teacher for a mom who can help him with all those writing assignments at home.
Right.
He loves that, Josh. But, we talk about that. Like, you're going to have to know how to write an informative essay. You're going to have to know how to write an explanatory paper. And, as much as he rolls his eyes at me at home, I know that he'll be better prepared than somebody who didn't get that. So I think anticipating those needs, what do we know that kids probably wouldn't have gotten to in the second semester of their school year?
And I would just add that I think communication amongst teachers of multiple levels probably, has to be stronger than ever, maybe, and really to try to intentionally build some bridges between or time really for teachers over the summer to talk about where they left off, what was not addressed. Because that stuff has to be addressed at the beginning of the school year. It's not necessarily, I would think, not necessarily starting in all English classes with, let's say, summary, as is kind of a tradition, but hey, let's start with, what you didn't, perhaps what you didn't get to last year.
And I think, we're in an unfortunate position where we don't have a ton of articulation with our 8th grade feeders. Some places do and some places don't.
Right.
But I think you can always start, we talk 9th and 10th grade, the standards are basically the same for 9th and 10th grade. Where do we build in rigor between 9th and 10th grade? I know some departments across our district have our 9th and 10th grade teams meeting together so that they can talk about that. And they're starting to align at that point. And so I totally agree with you. I think that collaboration and that conversation needs to happen more frequently and probably more over the summer, getting into school, just anticipating the needs of the students coming in.
Yeah. Okay, and so we've talked about this fifth question, this fifth question a little bit already, but so if we return to something close to normal next school year, what do you envision curriculum instruction will look like, or what you to what extent? I think this is, will be status quo, will be continued evolution. I think somebody's answer to this may be represent their worldview too. You a glass half empty or half full person, but what's your take on this?
This question stresses me out a ton. I won't lie. We talk about this. We meet twice a week in our department, our district department, and we talk about this constantly. I think I'm a glass half full kind of person on this question. I really think we're at that point we can do a lot of really interesting and innovative things with curriculum and instruction with this new model that we have, whatever it looks like. I see blended classrooms where teachers see their students maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and they get really good at doing direct instruction when they have kids in front of them. There's not a lot of wasted time. And I think if there's a good plan in place, they can get a lot accomplished in that time that they're face-to-face with their students. And then using Canvas to supplement that direct instruction for students when they're at home or wherever they're at, where they're going to continue their work. I see just a lot of positives coming out of this. I think it's going to shift the way that we think about education, the way that we think about curriculum and instruction, and less maybe about the busy work and more about what students really need, that PLC question, like, does it have leverage? Does it influence their learning in the future? Yeah. I think those questions are going to be really, really important. And those 4 PLC questions, what do we do when they know it?
Right.
Are we going to waste time and teach the same way to every single kid in our classroom? What do we do when they do know it? What do we do when they don't know it? So I think we'll get better at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on the optimistic outlook, and I do think that it takes um, maybe a continual push, though, not to return to that comfort level that you mentioned before. You know,
Hmm.
that's just I think tendency of everybody, human nature, to return to a level of comfort, but we need to
Hmm.
keep pushing forward.
I mean, this has been hard for everybody to adjust to.
Right?
And I think most teachers, if not all, I think their hearts really go out to kids.
Right.
Like this has been really hard. I've seen my own sons struggle with this. Charlie, my eighth grader, said, "Mom, I just really want to go back to school." And I said, "I'm going to treasure that moment. And I'm going to bring that up when you go back to school." and
Mm.
it does return to normal, and you're there 5 days a week with your teachers. Because I just know there's so much more that they're missing that isn't just the schoolwork. And I think we're going to have to be really sensitive about that too. And I think that community building, those social emotional supports, I think just everything is going to have to look different. And we just need to develop a clear picture of what that's going to look like.
Yeah. And when you say that, that reminds me of one of the students I have in my classes right now, in English class, and she's a student that um, cut class a whole lot
Hmm.
this past school year. A whole lot. There were like weeks where I didn't see her, and she recently said a couple weeks ago she just wants to go back to school. She can't believe that she's saying it, but she wants to go
Hmm.
back to school. She misses it, and I can't believe she said it. I mean, I knew there was something there inside of her. I saw that a little bit where, she it was something that she could learn, and she somewhere wanted to, but she definitely didn't show it very
Hmm.
well. But there's lots more besides just the standards for lots of kids.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of us probably made assumptions that kids would enjoy this, like they would love to be at home and to do this work from home. But I think there's so many other factors that complicated this. It was so abrupt. And I don't really think any of us were equipped to do that. I think learning at home really requires a lot of self-discipline and intrinsic motivation, which is why many students are not successful
Mhm.
at doing that. So I also think we have to build in plans to address those needs as well. Because distance learning is not for everybody. My whole master's was online, and it was a huge shift for me
Mhm.
because I love meeting face to face. I love talking to people and being in a room full of like-minded individuals. We don't even have that in our classrooms, don't get me wrong, but I think it's hard. If
Yeah.
that is not the way that you operate normally or work normally, I think we have to have a lot of grace for kids and teachers. This is not the way that we want to do this, but I think we do, like we said, have an opportunity to make this better.
Yeah. Okay, so to wrap it up here, can you share something that you're reading right now that's worth sharing?
Oh, sure. I was thinking about that. I'm reading, excuse me, about 3 different books right now, 3 or 4. I'm kind of like you. Fiction, been trying so hard to get back into that because I fall into that trap of just wanting to read nonfiction. So I've been reading All the Light We Cannot See. I don't know if you've read that one. Have you read it?
You know what? That's one that I started, and I started a couple times. I didn't finish. I need to get back to it though. I only made it chapter in or so. But
You're the
good.
fourth person that said that. Because I was talking to somebody else, and they're like, "Oh, I started it, and I was doing other stuff, and I couldn't, I'd pick it up, and I didn't know where I was." But I think it's so beautiful. The writing is so gorgeous, and it's not a time period I really like to read about, which is World War II.
Yeah.
But man, I really am enjoying it, and I love it. Every other chapter is a different perspective of a different character in the book.
Now, you say you don't like reading that time period, but have you heard of the book, the biography Unbroken? It was a movie, World War II. It was
Oh, yeah,
biography.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Great book. Great. Again, it's but even if you don't like that time period, I think it's one that's also worth reading.
Oh, well, I think since I've had children, I don't like to be sad, like intentionally sad. So I've just kind of, I've gotten away from that genre. But I also picked up The Glass Hotel. That's a new book by the woman who wrote Station 11. Completely different story. Station 11, if you haven't read that, is one of my favorite books of all time.
Okay. That's worth
it's dystopian, but it's not, I don't think it's bleak, and because I don't like dystopian literature either, but it's not, people rediscover Shakespeare and they rediscover music, and they really try and hold on to that, what makes people human, like creating a museum out of artifacts that they find. That's Station 11. The Glass Hotel, just started that one. It's good. It's about a Ponzi scheme. It starts out a little different, but I'm liking it so far. And then I would recommend people read Broadband. That's our one book project book this year by Claire Evans. And it's about females, the females who helped develop the internet. So it's great. The author has such a great voice. She's really like rock and roll, like really kind of punk. So that's been fun to read too.
Nice.
And then just really trying to read, different blogs and keep up with what's going on in the world. And I would always recommend everybody. I really like The Cult of Pedagogy. I think that's a terrific blog for people, especially with distance learning. She does so much vetting of technology tools and resources. I would always recommend that to people.
Yeah.
And Josh Kunith's blog too.
Okay. I just started Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad. It's a great book.
Okay.
He won the Pulitzer Prize 2016, and I just found out yesterday he has a more recent book called The Nickel Boys. I believe.
I was just gonna say that's Nickel Boys.
Yeah. So he's a really good writer. I've been meaning to read this for a while, but really from the very beginning engaging. The Underground Railroad is a novel, so historical fiction.
Now I think Nickel Boys though is based on a true story, isn't it?
I don't know that much about it, but that's on the to read next list. Right.
I think Carol Jago recommended that book last year. I want to say it's about a boys' school, like a juvenile detention center.
It is based on true story in Florida, and as you mentioned it, with all those mysterious deaths and graves, and it was in the news about 10 years ago, I think. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time, and I think again, your perspective, teacher, administrator, union,
Not an administrator,
and is helpful too on this challenging topic. So appreciate your time, Mindy.
Yeah, you're welcome, Josh.
So if you've made it this far, I thank you again for watching and listening to the 4th episode of the GAF podcast, where I discuss grading, assessment, and feedback in secondary schools. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at Josh Kunith on Twitter. Email me at joshkunith@gmail.com, or to check out my website at joshkunith.com. Thank you. Until next time, see you later.